Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Claudia Monticelli with another episode of Multiple Voices. My Multiple Voices podcast, true to its name, includes different series. For example, we have the Voices of Love, where we discuss relationships, the voice of empowerment, the voice of laughter and play, the voice of pleasure, and the magical voice of archetypes and how they change the way we live. But we also have the voice of memory that includes everything from history to discussions of past life regression. There's also writing voices, where we interview both seasoned writers and authors who have just started getting their feet wet with writing, and we learn what can work for you as potential writers. Our series called Voice of the Spirit discusses different forms of spirituality and religion. And then Channeling Voices is a series that covers what happens when you channel, but is also extended to mediumship. Take a moment to review this podcast if you've enjoyed listening, and leave a hearty 5 stars. I'd appreciate it. Enjoy your listening. Ladies and gentlemen, it's me again with another episode, and today I have a very interesting guest, Zen Benefiel. Say hello to our audience.
Namaste and in la catch.
It was interesting because I know the United States put their clocks forward, and I was frantically today. I'd forgotten. I was trying to get in touch with him, saying, "Oh, please, we have to do it earlier." Instead, then in the end, I realized that Arizona doesn't change their clocks. I felt like such a fool, Zen. But anyway, Zen is talking.
Isn't the fool off the wise?
Yes. Zen is talking to us precisely from Arizona. And we'll find out more about him and where he's moved, where he's gone. But he was adopted as an infant, and in 1975, a quest for truth in college brought him to a near-death experience. And after that, there was a profound understanding remained. And now, after 20 years or more of coaching, his background also includes work in the aerospace industry. Oh, it had included, I imagine, right? And secondary and post-secondary education, radio, television, event production, and team building for multi-million-dollar construction projects. Today, he facilitates people, places, and things to work together better and have them tie into a harmony among the people and the planet as his passion and purpose in both life and work move him to do. Now, this is a mouthful, Zen. I think to myself, boy, he's been there. Yeah, he's been there, done that. I have never had a near-death experience. So let me start, not by that. I'd like to go back. And you did mention you were adopted. Now,
Yes.
What did that make of you, Zen, in high school? What was your high school years like?
Oh, I had a blast.
Oh, good for you.
I was on varsity sports teams, starters, and on the football team as a free safety. As a freshman, I ran a 4.3 40-yard dash.
Oh, my God,
So I
so
was one of the
fast.
2 fastest people on the team.
Yeah.
Played basketball, played golf. I was a medalist on our
At
high school
that
team.
age? At that high
Yeah,
school age?
yeah.
Wow.
And I was a good academician. I graduated 10th in my class, and I didn't rank any higher because I was a bit mischievous, and our citizenship grades were included in the academic side, so my shenanigans dropped my academic performance level
Very little,
substantially.
though. Oh,
Yeah,
well,
well, I would have been close to
top.
salutatorian had I not done
Uh-huh.
what I did.
Wow.
But hey, I was a teacher's kid, and I ran around with a preacher's son, and so what
Yeah.
did
You had to do something wrong.
Oh yeah. It was funny. Um, but the impact at that point, I knew I was loved. I didn't have any questions about where I would came from, and I'd
Yeah.
had some experiences as a kid that kind of opened me up to uh, multiple dimensions, if you will.
Yeah.
I still hadn't put it all together yet, but as a teenager, I was a teenager,
Yeah.
right?
I
I was
get it.
here, I loved to do stuff. I wasn't, malevolent, but I sure was mischievous.
Oh, good for you. Wow. But then something happens. Okay. Did you know at the end of your 4 years in high school what you wanted to do? I mean, was it an easy choice for you?
No, it wasn't. And what I did was I chose to follow my uncles because I looked around me. It's like, okay, who do I see that I find most enjoyable,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, my father was a 32nd degree Mason and a tool and die maker. He built from scratch plastic injection molds for X cars for the headlamp and taillight assemblies for
Mm-hmm.
General Motors. Eh, right. Um, my uncle, on the other hand, was a general practitioner, so he was the town doctor.
Mm.
And he had this manner about him that he was just fun, uh, engaging, um, real good diagnostician, and he just had a great manner
We
about
liked
him.
this guy. We liked him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So of my choices, I thought, okay, well, I'll go down that route and see where I go. So I entered college in the pre-med program. I tested out of 5 quarters of general education going in,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, okay, well, this will be the direction I'm going to head and see where it takes me.
Yeah. Yeah. How long did that
Then,
last?
well, it lasted through the first year,
Ah, oh,
but
long.
in that, um, starting my second quarters when the near-death experience happened, uh, I was emotionally bereft of connection at that point internally. I just felt kind of empty and wondering, and
Yeah.
so I hit my knees, and actually, I hit them softly. Right, I knelt in prayer,
Yeah.
and I prayed, and I said, "Father, I want to know what truth is, and I'm willing to die for it if necessary."
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, that was, I think, on a Saturday night,
So, what
maybe
time of year was it? Autumn,
fall.
fall. Okay.
Fall, right? It was the beginning of the uh,
Second quarter.
winter quarter.
Okay, the winter
So
quarter.
second
Mm-hmm.
quarter, it was the actual date that it happened, and you'll love this, was 11/11/1975.
Mm.
So this was before anything,
Yeah.
the 11/11 came
Portal.
up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and maybe I was the initial creator of it. I don't know. Um, in the, excuse me.
Achoo!
Oh,
Well, this
sorry.
is important
Uh,
stuff when you sneeze.
well, yeah, sneeze at the truth, right?
Right.
So this on Tuesday afternoon, I
Mm-hmm.
came back from school and I was laying across my dorm room bed, listening to Journey's first album
Mm-hmm.
and a song called "In the Morning Day."
Achoo!
Oh, excuse me.
That's all right.
Allergies are kicking in. In between the vocals and the vamp on "In the Morning Day," this voice I've been familiar with since I was a kid.
Achoo!
Oh, excuse me. My goodness.
No, I'm
Um,
glad it's you and not me because I usually do that. And I start sneezing 10 times in a row. So it's nice to see somebody else doing it.
yeah, and I was fine a little bit ago. Pardon me for just a second.
Yeah.
Ah, all right. So I'm laying across the dorm room bed. This voice says, I'm going to give names Bruce. It says, Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in? And I thought, wow, what do I believe in? Uh, Christ consciousness. Feels a little empty.
Mm.
Didn't question it, just honored the feeling, right? Then I went on to cosmic consciousness, and it felt full. And so I said, yes. And then a guitar riff happens. It sounds like a rocket ship taking off. I get a tug from my solar plexus. I pop out of body. I'd had plenty of OBs before, so I was comfortable with it.
What are
And
OBs?
OBEs are out of body
Okay.
experiences. And many people have them. Most often they happen kind of happenstance.
Yeah.
It's
Generally,
spontaneous.
that's a topic of discussion on my YouTube
Yeah.
channel often. Hmm.
So, and I'd had them since I was a kid as well, so I was quite comfortable. So I pop out of body and I'm looking at my body laying across my dorm room bed, and then I turn to look where I'm going,
Hmm.
and I couldn't even get turned around
Hmm.
before I was engulfed by white light. And it had this not just feeling like home, it had this iridescent, effervescent, high-pitched sensation to it. And then
Now,
within
hold on.
moments,
Let me stop you.
sure,
You were out of body and then the light came.
yes,
Okay, now this is quite particular because you're watching it from a third position. Let's say a third. I'm saying a third position.
the observer. The
Mm-hmm.
observer self, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Yeah, there's a participant, the observer, and the will.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At least and that's one of the ways I understand it. I always love that trinitized, you know,
Mm-hmm.
fractal that occurs,
But you
and just
said
so.
you were stopped in your tracks. You just couldn't, you know. This is why I've stopped and asked you for clarification because at one point you said, but then I couldn't move. You and I'm thinking, wait, he was out of body because then the light came. Now I'm not
Yeah,
sure. Maybe
no,
I misunderstood.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I think so because I could move. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even though I was just my consciousness at that
Okay.
time embraced and enveloped
Mm-hmm.
by this white light, I could still think because
Mm-hmm.
I was analyzing what was happening.
Okay.
And so I knew that I wasn't dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the next thing that happened is the impetuous teenager came in because the light got boring,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even though it felt
So you
full of
were
everything.
19. You weren't yet 20. So okay,
18.
18. Mm-hmm.
And so I asked the question. I was just thinking to myself, right? I wasn't really talking to anybody. I was just thinking, wow, is there more? Right? And then I feel a movement, and I'm in an indigo background now with points of light surrounding me.
Mm-hmm.
And I intuitively knew, I started to ask the question of, okay, what are these points of light? And then I instantly knew they were
Mm-hmm.
points of consciousness,
Of
whether in body or
consciousness.
not.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Whether in body or not, I wasn't sure because I knew I wasn't, but I had the sense that they were somehow. So then the voice picks back up at that point
Mm-hmm.
and says, these are those that you are to work with in order to facilitate a new world order.
Mm-hmm.
It will happen in your lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. Have faith and trust that everything you need will be there at its appointed time.
Mm-hmm.
Trust and allow.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel another rush of energy and I'm back in my body taking a gulp of air.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the trials and tribulation side of it's understatement.
Mm-hmm. Already begun. Yeah.
However, the second thing I got from it was that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware.
Mm-hmm. Now
So then my quest
you
was
are.
began.
You're. Hold on. We're 19.
Sure,
The near-death experience. You're describing it as a near-death experience.
it's the best label I've found for it.
Yeah.
But near death, spiritual
Excuse me.
awakening,
It
that
doesn't
kind of book.
seem like a near-death experience. It seems like an awakening.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I would have described it as an awakening because you were called upon for
Hmm.
a purpose, right? And when you
Yeah,
talk
I got
about
marching orders, that's for sure.
you have they, they've given you quite a menu. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
So you said these when the lights that you saw, you thought to yourself that they were points of consciousness. Now,
I
this
knew it. I
yeah
didn't think. I didn't have to think. It
okay.
was like this was,
Right. Now,
the
why
essence
I'm
of knowledge.
stopping you is because there's such an overriding I don't want to say argument, but it is a theme of contention between
Oh, the New
what is
World Order has
consciousness?
quite a charge to it. Now,
What is
my understanding,
consciousness? And what is the soul? Is the soul
oh,
conscious?
absolutely.
So when you say it was consciousness, I'm wondering, is it spirit light? Because oh, the big gurus out there are talking about the soul being overlapping with consciousness, and the soul is consciousness. And so when we see light, that's spirit light.
Individually, there's the whole notion of the one mind,
Right.
right? Or oneness. Each
Mm-hmm.
of us are individuated in that. We don't have to give up our individuality in order to
Right.
experience. Matter of
Right.
fact, the cosmic consciousness condensed into form has specific, if not perfected form, fit, and function in the world.
Uh-huh.
And
Right.
that's what, not we, but some seek
Mm-hmm.
because they understand that it's there at a very deep level. Now, whether that comes from, you know, precursive information or lifetimes
Mm-hmm.
or, it doesn't really matter. The fact is we're here and we have that sense
Mm-hmm.
about. And so the notion of the one mind is this repository of information, everything that's infinite intelligence, if you
Infinite
will. But
intelligence. Right. Mm-hmm.
and yet it's specific to each individual, and it's the information we get is based on the questions we ask.
Right. Right. And I think individual to each person, the way the information it comes and they are able to retrieve that
Right.
is also very
Howard
personal.
Gardner, his work with the multiple intelligences kind of reveals
Can you
another
repeat the
level
name
of
again, please? I you
Howard Gardner,
Uh-huh, right.
and
Hmm.
he introduced the multiple intelligences
Yeah.
back in 1982.
Yeah.
And so now they are somewhat included in lesson plans for
Yes.
classroom work.
Somewhat. Yeah.
Right. I did in one of the charter schools that I taught for. And I actually put together multiple intelligence learning centers
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
really impressed the owner of the school and got all kinds of praise. And then I had challenges with one of the students that ended up in me having to leave.
Ah.
Unfortunate. Happens. It was a dollar situation that
Yeah.
uh, unfortunately schools are dependent on
Well,
butts and
what
seats.
money comes in, and that's what makes things popular or not. So, where,
Yeah.
let's say you are in Arizona, we mentioned that
Yes.
now. Where did you live before you? Have you always grown up in Arizona? Or is this a
No,
recent
no.
choice?
I was born in Indianapolis,
Okay.
orphaned at birth,
Mm-hmm.
uh, adopted by a couple from Alexandria,
Mm-hmm.
which was about 60 miles northeast of
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis, and grew up there till I was 23,
Mm-hmm.
and was married at that time. And the auto industry had really decimated the environment job wise, and so we had the opportunity. I'd
Yeah.
lost all three jobs. I was playing in a band as a drummer, working part time as a machinist and as a meat cutter. And in 3 days' time, all three jobs disappeared. And I went out
Mm.
on the front porch, threw my hands up to the sun, said, "Okay, I'm listening. Where do you want me to go?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll be darned if I didn't
That's how it
hear
happens.
Phoenix. And so 3 weeks later, we were packed up and on the road.
Yeah. And you've chosen Arizona as your next stop, let's say.
Yeah, it's kind of my um, station for the
Yes,
time being, right?
for the time being.
Until I'm, until I'm released. But I've been here for 40 some odd years, and,
Oh,
and
well, yeah.
it's
It's
had
suiting you just
tremendous,
fine.
absolutely.
Now, we ended up where we were in at the university, medicine, and now came this experience. You left the medical program, or did you, go through the entire years?
No, the second year I switched to a psychology major with a uh,
Hmm.
comparative religion minor
Mm-hmm.
because of that. I had started reading everything I could get a hold of: Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Quran, Urantia book. I'd already read the Bible 2 or 3 times. Uh, so I was looking for similar types of experiences that others might have had because I
Yeah.
knew it was that powerful. And yet I still had the questions of, okay, how? What do I
Yeah.
need to do to prepare? And those were the two basic questions. And so as life went on, I'd actually bought a couple of sets of drums, made a stupid decision, looking back on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I put them in my dorm room and eventually had to move out of the dorm because I'd spent my
Mm-hmm.
room and board money
Mm-hmm.
on the drums. So that set me up for some precarious events, and I got beat up at a frat house one night
Oh,
looking to
Jesus.
stay warm. It was 77 below zero
Now
wind
that
chill
could have been
factor.
a near death experience right there. You were lucky.
Absolutely, I
Yeah.
was. Didn't like how it happened, but it probably saved my life.
So let's
And
say, you're painting a picture of a man, a young man, but a young man looking to the
a
future.
young, somewhat foolish man, right?
Yeah, yeah. A normal guy who likes to
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
good
yeah.
time. But then the call came, and then something shook your world. And in tarot speak,
Literally.
we call this a tower situation.
Well, you mentioned that Thoreau. Okay, so my parents had me go see a psychiatrist. And after the third visit, he says, you're not crazy. You've had a spiritual awakening. Why so young? I don't understand because most people don't go through it till the mid 40s, if they
Mm-hmm.
ever do.
Mm-hmm.
But come here, I got something I want to show you. And he had his office in a historic home in downtown Anderson, 2 story.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he says, come here. And so he takes me upstairs, and at the top of the stairs, he opens the door, and my heart just explodes as I'm looking
You
into
feel
this
the
room. It was like,
energy. Mm.
yeah. And there's all kinds of metaphysical signs and posters and stuff hanging from the ceiling and bookshelves and a card table with a deck of tarot cards sitting
Mm-hmm.
right inside the door. And I
Mm-hmm.
look at those and I look at him, like, here's a psychiatrist with tarot cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
Right.
did that fit? Right? Because it didn't at that time in most cases. So he says, you know what those are? I said, yeah. And explained it. And he said, have you ever had them read? And I said, no. He said, would you like to? I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
we
Why
sat
not?
down, did a reading. And at the end of it, he says, my best advice, don't talk to anybody. They're not going to understand the wisdom that you carry at this age.
Yeah.
And yeah, I sort of listened, but not really. Um, and so after I got beat up at the frat house, my parents decided that I needed some time off,
Mm-hmm.
and so they committed me. And I was on
Now, when you say
2000
committed you, what does that mean exactly?
psychiatric ward.
Uh huh.
So I was at the emergency room getting my eye stitched up from being accosted at a frat house.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad shows up, and I said, "Okay, I'm glad you're here, ready to go home." And he says, "No, I think you need to stay for a little bit." And I'm thinking, blow
Oh.
to the head, possible
Oh
concussion,
no.
overnight observation. Yeah, I can go for that. Then two orderlies walk up. They escort me onto the elevator, take me up to the seventh floor. The door opens, and there's this door with a little bitty wire mesh window, and this old black guy that kind of large. He's sitting in a chair. He stands up, grabs his wad of keys from his belt loop, and says, "Oh, got another one for me, huh?"
And that's the
And then I
death
realized,
experience. That
well, they had me on. I tried. They, of course, diagnosed me and then put me on 2,000 milligrams of Thorazine a day, and I should have been a lump in the
and
corner, but I was out
Thorazine
playing
does
paintball.
what? Thorazine.
Well, it's an antipsychotic
Okay.
depressant. So if you are um, being if you react to the drug how it is supposed to work,
Yeah.
all right, you'll be a lump in the corner.
Okay. And
And I was up playing ping pong, beating the male nurses. Right? They couldn't figure it out.
yeah.
So after a while, um, I figured out how to tell the doc what he wanted to hear.
Ah.
And immediately it was a miracle cure. And he told my parents I didn't think he would ever come out of it speaking about me. And that he was impressed, and so they started weaning me off the Thorazine.
Uh-huh.
I spent 6 weeks there. When I
Oh,
came out, my self-confidence and my self-esteem was just,
shot.
bottomed out.
Yeah.
And I would literally shake so bad because I was afraid of being rejected when people would ask me questions about what was going on. And,
Yeah.
and I wanted to be truthful and honest. I'm a full disclosure
Right.
kind of guy. My dad used to say, the truth is less than full disclosure. And I
Mm.
finally got
Mm.
that, right?
Yeah.
At that time, though, it was like, I'm going to be honest. You ask me a question, I'm going to go as deep as I can and be as honest as I
Mm.
can. And so that set up this fear inside of me that I would shake so bad that my body would tremble.
Now
And it
wait.
took me a couple of years to get over that.
Now this is a perfect time to not change subject, but to bring in another element, because in a moment like this, the first thing I would think as a woman, I would think, well, wasn't there any love in his life? Not of the parents, of your parents, but of a woman or a man, whatever your pleasure. Was there a person who was important to you in that time?
No, no, I was alone. Uh, my core request at the time was I just wanted to be listened to.
Right, right.
I just wanted to be heard.
But was it,
And there was no listening.
well, now you were, let's say, dependent on your parents, especially at this moment, it was almost impossible for you to break away. And you were not in this mindset
Sort
to
of. When
do
I
it.
got out of the hospital, um, Dad had a vehicle for me. Within about 3 weeks, I had a job,
Mm-hmm.
and so I began rebuilding.
Yeah, your life. Hmm.
Yeah.
And did you then move away from your family home at one point? When was that about?
Um, I was 20. Um, I met a woman, and
You were 20
uh,
at that point? Was it 20 or a little older?
yeah,
I'm losing
no,
count. Okay. Okay.
I was 20. We got married when I was 21,
Mm-hmm.
and had our first child at 22,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and then at 23 moved to Arizona, and she was pregnant with our second child.
Okay, so already you're moving at a very young age to Arizona. So let's say you flew the coop as soon as you were able to get your things together, have the love. This is why I asked you about a love in your life, because that was what then gave you that necessary energy to do what you're supposed to be doing, right?
For the time being,
Hmm.
we ended up getting divorced, and the activity or that whole process nearly destroyed me yet again.
Hmm.
Uh,
But you were in Arizona already.
uh-huh.
Uh huh. Okay, so now we have crisis upon crisis. Now just
Yeah,
hold
trials
that.
and tribulations. I was
Trials and
told they were going to come.
tribulations, yeah, trials and tribulations. But now I'm going to move forward a little bit, not to jump the gun. We're not in a hurry here, but why I'm jumping forward is this, because at one point you mentioned that you facilitate people, places, and things to work together. Now, I need a little more definition of what that means in practical
Well,
terms, and
practical
maybe an
terms,
example.
sure.
Hmm.
For instance, I was one of 5 people that ran one of the largest arts and crafts festivals in the country,
Hmm.
right? We had
Yeah.
250,000 people, patrons,
Hmm.
that would travel through the event during the weekend. My area, I had 350 vendors and 20 food vendors and about 20 volunteers.
Hmm.
And so I was in charge of that area. I've also ran events on my own where I was completely in charge of logistics, um, which 5,000 people over a weekend, 30 some odd speakers. So
Hmm.
the logistics included all the chairs, the vendor. We had 120 vendors, so all
Okay,
the
hold
10 by
on.
10.
Now, these events, what
Yeah.
kind of events were they? For product sales, for
Well,
spirituality?
the arts and
Oh, the arts
crafts
and crafts.
were a arts and crafts
Right.
festival.
Right.
um, world renowned, as a matter of
Uh-huh.
fact. The event that I was just telling you about was called the Prophets Conference. So you
Uh-huh.
can kind of get an
The
idea what it was
prophets.
about.
Mm-hmm.
Prophets,
Ah, the prophets.
P R O
A
P H
man.
E T.
It's a man.
Okay.
It's not a woman.
No,
Okay.
no, no, because Joan Ocean was one of the speakers,
Mm-hmm.
Zachariah Sitchin, Edgar Mitchell,
Mm-hmm.
Jose Arguez, people of that ilk during
So,
that time.
so this was sort of a turning point. Did it? We talked about the trials and tribulations, and then there's this type. This is sort of down the line, or
Well, the turning point, okay, so right after my divorce,
uh huh.
um, I had an opportunity a couple of years later. Of course, the name Zen came around about that time. I'd rented a house with a guest house,
Mm-hmm.
and a friend who was the founder of the Church of the New Age Spiritual Revolution of America
Mm-hmm.
at the time. He and I'd gone to a full moon meditation. We were sitting out in front of the house afterwards
Oh, you
and
were one of those. The New
had a really
Age.
deep conversation. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I was been called that.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, so we were sitting, had this deep conversation. We felt quiet for a moment. I went inside, closed my eyes. It, I, I didn't go inside the house. I went inside
Yeah.
myself, right?
Sure.
Closed my
Sure.
eyes, and I
Sure.
asked the question, "Who am I?" And I
Mm-hmm.
hear his chair move. I open my eyes up, turn to look at him, locked on his eyes. First words out of his mouth, "You are Zendor."
Uh-huh.
So as if that wasn't enough, my second sight kicks on, eyes open, and I see this starscape with a huge stone arch doorway and a thick wooden door slowly opening toward me. And I hear door to what is. Well, what do you do with that? I told him what I experienced, and that was it. I didn't talk to anybody else. Well, a couple of years later, I had the opportunity to produce and host a television show. We
Mm-hmm.
called it One World. And my format was I interviewed people from all walks of life about how they got where they were at, what prompted them to do
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing from both inner and outer perspectives, what fears they encountered, more importantly, how they overcame them,
Mm-hmm.
and how they saw that fitting into the common human experience around them. So about 6 shows in, and I used my given name, Bruce Benefiel,
Mm-hmm.
with the subtitle Zendor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Kind of
Zendor.
what is.
Mm-hmm.
So just playing around with it. Why not? Right. So about 6 shows in, one of the guys on the set called me Zen, and it just cascaded.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really didn't have to do anything about it. I
Mm-hmm.
just stepped into it. And of course, having that name is a bit challenging because you have to live up to it.
Okay. Now, there's a theme that I'd like to approach now.
Mhm.
And it's very dear to my heart. And it is creating this bridge between, because this is what I was hoping you'd come to, but I'm going to lead you there.
Cool.
Creating bridges across science, spirituality, and everyday life.
Mhm. That's been my objective because there's got to be an explanation for the experience. And the more we understand it, the better we can integrate and ascend to new opportunities with it.
Okay, I need some more practical examples of of your experience as
Mhm.
a facilitator for creating the bridge. Do you see what I'm saying?
All right, here's a perfect example.
Okay.
In the part, so the one of the hats that I wear is a partnering facilitator for building road, bridge, waterway, and park services.
Okay.
And they're multi-million dollar projects. My job is to build the stakeholder team foundation,
Okay.
right? So the members come together. I take them through a process. That process includes a an overview of the principles of partnering, communication, integrity, um, trust,
Yeah.
and conflict
Faith.
resolution.
Okay. Resolution. Okay.
Well, these are professional people,
All right.
so
So
religion
they're
and
hands
faith
on.
never come
Mm-hmm.
into that. These
Mm-hmm.
are engineers,
Mm-hmm.
contractors, construction
Mm-hmm.
people, right? Construction leaders of, so it's not the guys that are working on the
Sure.
site. So after the partnering principles, then we go into a code of ethics, which is how they're going to agree to work with each other, and they choose that. I
Okay.
just facilitate the process of,
Hmm.
what their expectations are of how they're going to
Okay.
work together. Then there's also the charter goals and objectives that
Hmm.
we outline,
Yeah.
and then we take that, I print it out,
Yeah.
I get them all to sign it,
Yeah.
and then I talk about being on the same page and what that kind of
Right.
commitment does
Uh-huh.
energetically.
Yeah. Yeah.
I talk about the simple ideas and the notions of when you put your attention, intention, and interaction towards something,
Yeah.
then everything else becomes available for that to happen in ways that can sometimes seem a little magical. Now,
Okay.
what happens in the meetings themselves
Yeah.
is that by talking about jobarchy, for instance, is the term I use, which
Hmm.
means the job's the boss and everybody wins. So your
Hmm.
ego is left at the door, and there's no ego without we go. Egos are still important. They just need to be directed to the we
Okay.
go.
Okay. So hold
Right.
on. Now, you're bringing, through the language you use as well, and that's a big component. It is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
All right. So you're bringing them through this, or crossing the bridge, or creating the bridge. And that is a form of spirituality, the language that you use, and creating the glue for these people to work together.
Right.
How did they
The
respond?
intent is to have them be in harmony with the needs of the job.
Okay.
And sometimes there's value engineering involved where they can do things differently that
Hmm.
are cheaper or better or can pull in the time frame. So the effectiveness of my work ends up in being a shortened schedule and with more profit for the companies.
Okay. And how did they respond to this idea of using your intentions to create magic, essentially?
Well, I don't use that kind of language
Hmm.
with them.
Well,
What
you
I
said
do is
it
I
was
pay attention.
magical. It could be magical. Or was that just for
Well,
my sake?
that was just for our sake and the
Hmm.
conversation. No, with these guys, I really got to be careful of hedging the edge of that because
Okay.
there are,
As life has
there's a
taught you, you have to be
yeah,
careful
there's a
what you say,
sensitivity that needs to be
too.
involved. Exactly.
Hmm.
Um, so however, because I'm a good listener and also an empath, I pay attention to micro
Hmm.
expressions. So I look for those opportunities to draw out conversation.
Okay. Okay.
And
And
then through that, illustrate how the conversation builds the team and ultimately allows them to work together in a greater capacity
okay.
because we've gotten those the constrictions for
Uh-huh.
it out of the way. So in a sense, are able to feel a bit more vulnerable with each other
Okay. Okay. I get that.
and talk
So,
about how they feel and
but
what they
I'm
think and
going
what needs to
to
be done.
stop just a moment because I interview a lot of people, and a lot of people do this in the sense that they are in the corporate world, and then all of a sudden they have some form of of awakening, let's say, and they change the nature of the way they put people together, similar to this. My question now is a little, well, I'll just spit it out.
Yeah, bring it
how
out. Let's go.
how much of that is actually dictated to you from the powers that be? I'll use that expression because I'll give you an example before you respond. For example, there was a guest, a woman, who had written an entire book dictated to her from what you call consciousness, from a spirit. And it was a story about a woman in the South who grew up in the turn of the century, 1890, 1920, things like that. And it took her a long
Mhm.
time to write that book, right? Now, in this case, what I'd like to know is how much of the job that you're doing you know, is given to you from those spirits that have spoken to you so
I
far.
don't see a distinction, honestly.
Sorry?
I don't see a distinction.
Between what and what?
I don't experience a distinction. I show up with my attention, my intention, and my interaction all focused on being what needs to be,
Okay, I get
and
it.
and under and understanding the process that I need to engage, because every group, the conversations are going to be different, but the process is always the same.
Okay, so let's
And
say
so
that when they were talking to you, when the message came to you that your life is going to be full of trials and tribulations, it is as if they were saying, "Look, Bruce, at the time, you gotta veer a little to the right because otherwise, you're gonna get in." But here, you are
didn't get that.
but the thing is, you took a turn and you did change the way you did things.
No, not
Okay,
really.
then
I
I'm
just
missing
did them with
something.
more intention.
But I'm missing something still in the
I
past.
understand. I understand. And maybe the general sense is there is a shift. I was 18, so there really
Right.
wasn't a shift. This was a progression.
Right, right, right.
And, and it was just an added piece that allowed that progression to happen with more foreknowledge
Uh-huh. Okay. You were
so that
more
I was
mindful.
aware,
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's the place that I was in. And because, I was having a conversation the other day with a woman, we were talking about NDEs and
Mm-hmm.
the types of things that happen. And when you go into the one, the idea of non-dual consciousness is that you're absorbed into the one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've had experiences in the light. I've been in the void as well. There is still an observer, which
Of
means
course.
the I does not disappear. It becomes, there's a bridge with the I and the we,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
they become one,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's still that um,
Awareness.
perspective of the I
Mm-hmm.
in,
Yeah.
in the we, and the individuation. That's how we're designed.
Okay.
So this notion then, when one has that awareness, it's like everything's natural. There's no distinction between
Okay.
this dimension or another. There's simply moments that are bridges, I guess, for lack of a
Mm-hmm.
better. And the more you operate in that, the more you begin to trust it, the more available and vulnerable you are to it. And
Okay.
so
I
it
get it.
becomes a singular
Sure. Mm-hmm.
experience.
All right. I'm going to throw something out. You will see what happens with this.
Should I put my mitt on?
Huh? Sorry?
Should I put my mitt on?
No,
If
we'll
you're going
see. I'll give you
okay,
time
all
out
right,
if you need. All right. The
okay.
notion. Have you ever dealt with the notion of time, time travel, timelines, different time
Yeah.
dimensions? Okay. What was your experience with that? Do you remember?
Well, there's been several opportunities. One was on board a ship, giving being an MC for a meeting about first contact,
Mm-hmm.
and there was some discussions about how things are in other worlds, and how we're evolving, and some scenery that went along with that. That I'm not sure whether it was the Earth or someplace else, but I saw it was like a vision of how we can be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Then uh, just last year, I ran across memoirs of Wilbert Smith, who ran Canada's UFO investigation
Yeah.
program in the
Yeah. Yeah.
1950s,
Mm-hmm.
funded by the Ministry of Transportation. And he had many conversations with people from elsewhere.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that he wrote down that they had shared with him was that their concept of time is that it's a measurement in the change of entropy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when we step back and look at sure, we've got, day, night, the revolutions of the planet, the moon, and all that kind of stuff. And yet there is another sense of time to where things are flowing, right? They're in harmony.
Mm-hmm.
There's a truncation of the time necessary in order to accomplish things,
Yeah.
right? Which is kind of where we're at right now in this transition from the Piscean to the Aquarian age. And that as we move into it, we've got 15 years before the close of the window, as
Mm-hmm.
you're aware. and that in this emergent beingness that's happening in humanity right now. And even Valentina Morovina, who's a Russian academician, wrote a dissertation recently about her studies. Now, this is a dual degree, PhD level
Mm-hmm.
Russian academia,
Yeah.
science type, who's been studying the mutations and the scientific evidence of the ascension, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
becoming a greater being.
So she
And
was
it's
in
happening throughout
physics.
humanity.
She was from a physics background, I
That
imagine.
that's one of her
Yeah.
degrees. Yeah. The other one I think was in biology, but if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So, and her dissertation is called "The Global Mutation of Humanities,"
Mm-hmm.
and it is on
Oh,
YouTube.
this is interesting. I hope she would think of publishing it, or if she has
Well,
published
it
it.
is published,
Ah,
and
okay.
it's in Russian. Okay, there are
Mm-hmm.
English subtitles to the dissertation, and there is a
Mm-hmm.
website available that has the dissertation on it that can be translated as well.
So it's the
So here's
global
the thing.
mutation of humanity. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, just another one of the indicators that this emerging natural order, which is the true new world order,
Mm-hmm.
because it's in harmony with self, others, and the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this innate understanding that we have at a designed level that we're finally peeling back the layers of the onion enough to
Mm-hmm.
get to, because we're not thinking as much and trying to project what we think we know. We're actually asking questions. And of course, you cannot think your
Yeah.
way through a system built on vibration. You have to sense your way
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, that's where I wanted you. Because when you build bridges between science, spirituality, and everyday life, that spirituality element seems not to trickle down in everyday life for everyone. Sure, the experience is a
That,
spiritual
that's a
experience.
personal choice and application, in my opinion.
It's a personal choice because you see it that way, but let me put myself in the shoes of the engineer that's working on that project. He doesn't know better. And so he doesn't have that choice. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, the choice is to ask the questions based on the intelligence he has.
Yeah.
And it's still a choice, right? Because
Yes.
there is an awareness that there's stuff we don't know.
Okay. Now, let me stop you there. Before we
Sure.
got on and I pressed that record button, we were talking about music, about your wife, a Russian wife who has a very strong musical background, like yourself. And you
Right.
were talking about classical piano and everything. And why I bring this up is that a colleague of mine, an academic, said to me, a really intelligent German background man, I
Hmm.
said, it would be interesting for you to start playing the piano or something like that. I was talking about music. He says, no, that's impossible because I don't have
Ah,
that
there
in
it
my,
is.
he says, I don't have that in my experience. I can't imagine it and therefore I can't do it, you know?
Right.
Now,
Well,
this is what I'm
here's the
getting
the
at.
phrase that comes to mind. Anything is possible to those who believe,
Yes, believe.
right?
Okay,
So if you
okay,
don't believe it, that's true for you.
okay, okay,
Again, it's a choice,
okay. So let's
right?
go
You can
back to the
believe
engineer.
the
Let's go.
possibility, or the engineer can say, you know, I understand these things. These are my
Yeah.
schematics. These are my
Mm-hmm.
dimensions. This is the project that
Mm-hmm.
I have that I need to craft. I work with manufacturing engineers in the
Yeah.
aerospace industry. I was a production control coordinator responsible for $7 million a month in
Mm-hmm.
uh, commercial spares.
Mm-hmm.
So 800 part numbers. But in the process of being that, though, I was in charge of making sure units were assembled and tested and shipped. So when there was a problem on the assembly line, because of a casting or a misfitting nut, or,
Mm-hmm.
or something that just wasn't allowing the assembly to be produced.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had to get the manufacturing engineers involved, and we had to look at, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what's the real issue here? Are there design changes? Are there simple assembly instruction changes that
Right.
need to be made? Or do we need to go back to the
Yeah.
casting from which it began from, if
Mm-hmm.
it is a cast part, right? Because the cast parts are then machined, but if the casting's off, the machine,
Right.
you can do all kinds of machining to it, it's never going to fit right. So by looking at that, then there had to be this progression of asking the right questions and finding the answers and then
Right.
proceeding with the solutions.
Of
Now,
course.
from a spiritual standpoint, knowing that exists is the first step.
Okay.
There's a
The
solution
belief.
for everything.
Okay. Let me say one thing. You're with the
Yeah.
engineer, what you were describing before, and the engineer does his job. And you coordinate and you speak to them in a certain way, the intentions and the whole bit. You
Mm-hmm.
start halfway into the project and he sees you're really cool, calm, and collected. And Zen, I mean, he must be cool, calm, and selected with that name. He pulls you aside, coffee break, and he says, "Hey, Zen, I see that you're really you're on the ball because you never lose your cool. You never lose your you don't get angry no matter what happens. What happened to you to make you like that? I imagine it must have been a big deal. Now, this day and age, we're talking about now, Zen now. At that point, would you talk to him about it, the awakening that you've had? Would you feel comfortable in doing that to this man who you don't know necessarily? You don't know his
Today,
beliefs.
absolutely,
Uh-huh.
absolutely comfortable. And I would also say, to begin with, it wasn't really a major breakthrough. It was a lot of little ones that added up,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And, or, who was it that said, the major breakthrough happens because of a lot of smaller
Sure.
breakdowns.
Yes.
And that's how we build. We have to let go of ourselves, realize it's not all about
Yeah.
us,
Yeah, yeah.
and yet it is,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Truth has a lot of paradox,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the sooner we get that, the
Yeah.
healthier attitude we'll
Yeah.
have,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, because it all is there's this bipolar framework that we deal
Mm-hmm.
with. That's
Yep.
what is.
Good,
So
bad,
how
the
do we
distinction.
effectively
Mm-hmm.
do that?
Yeah.
And first of all, we recognize that there's a way.
Mm-hmm.
We may not understand what that is, but we are intelligent enough to ask the questions about, oh, well, if this were so, then what might we be able to do
Okay.
to
Okay.
understand it more, to
Right.
alter it, to make it better, to get more people involved, right,
Mm-hmm.
or to share it, um,
So
right, for
we're
that
winding
process.
down here, and but I'd like you to think just a moment with your experience. If you had to give a suggestion to our audience and listeners, what could help them? Because why I'm asking this is because I get a lot of questions. What am I meant to do? What is my purpose in life? Is there anything you can suggest to them that would help them in some way to answer that?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Pay attention to what's right in front of you,
Okay.
first of all,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
because the world doesn't happen outside of you, it happens
Right.
right in front of you.
Exactly. This is a
And
very good
oftentimes we
suggestion.
circumvent that to look at the horizon in some kind of expectation, which sets up disappointment,
Right.
usually,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when you're doing what's in front of you to do, then the universe will acknowledge, oh, they're paying attention,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then that, uh, for a lack of a better, momentum tunnel
Mm-hmm.
begins to bring things in. For instance, and here's a
Mm-hmm.
real practical example.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I do my own podcast called One World in the New World, and I interview people kind of the same as the old One World,
Mm-hmm.
which was a show I did back in the
Yeah.
90s. And in so doing, I've kind of been looking for people now because I have a global market where I
Yeah.
had a local market before. And I follow the promptings of, oh, this person might be interested
Yeah.
or interesting. And one of the guys I interviewed recently, who I'd known for 20 years, I don't know everybody,
Mm-hmm.
for very long sometimes, but this one I did. He was a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and he runs an attorney's firm called Attorneys for Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like it was necessary for us to have a conversation. So we did.
Mm-hmm.
In that conversation, I find out that he has helped co-found a global peace movement
Mm-hmm.
called Live and Let Live.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the conversation, and once we signed off, or hit the record button again,
Mm-hmm.
he says, it sounds like we're really close, like we're on the same page. You'll really take a look at the organization. I'd love to have you.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a conversation over lunch a couple of weeks later,
Mm-hmm.
and I accepted taking over or becoming the Arizona chapter
Mm-hmm.
leader. And then shortly thereafter, the executive director that was in place
Mm-hmm.
decided it was too much for them and they bowed out.
Oh.
And Mark asked me
Mm-hmm.
to step in
Mm-hmm.
along with another person in Hawaii. And I thought, okay, here's a perfect opportunity for the male and the female energy to work together, both having logistics backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we've got
Right.
a more in-depth understanding of how to actually create and activate a movement
Things.
and
Mm-hmm.
get people, places, things to
Mm-hmm.
work together better. So by paying attention to what was in front of me and
Yeah.
saying yes and stepping in, leaning into, even
Right.
though, I mean, here's a organization with 30 chapters in 19 countries already.
Yeah.
So to step into that could be overwhelming to
Sure.
some. I feel perfectly
Comfortable.
prepared and
Mm-hmm.
in the Zen space,
Mm-hmm.
right, for it to just naturally unfold. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
far, that's what it's doing.
Pay
So when you
attention.
pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to what's in front of you and you do it systematically, you'll begin to see
Mm-hmm.
synchronicities, which will
Yeah.
guide you to other people, places, and things, right?
Yeah.
As long as you're paying attention. And this will gradually move you into that perfect place where the skill set that you have will have its perfect application in the world. A lot of people think that, oh, I've developed these skills. I need to sever that
Right.
part of my life and start fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of dumb,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you have those skill sets and
Yeah.
you've
You
been
have to.
given the training and
Mm-hmm.
all of that, do you think the universe wants you just to
Stop.
stop
Yeah.
and no, there's a progression of your
Right.
life, just like there's a progression in the timeline, and all of it is for you to enjoy, learn from, grow,
Mm-hmm.
and then ascend into this new order that's
Yeah.
coming as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Zen, it has been a pleasure. I
It's
really
been
appreciate you having taken the time to talk to us. And who knows what the future will bring? Our paths may cross again.
I certainly hope so. And I do hope that you and your audience considers taking a look at
Mm-hmm.
liveandletlive.org spelled out
Mm-hmm.
and joining with our global peace movement, even if it's just in emotional support.
Good. Good.
Every
Excellent.
little bit makes a difference.
Thanks again. Thanks again, San. Bye bye.
Namaste and in la catch.